All right, now for the update on Beta's intermediary language model. So as a quick recap, we are building an artificial general intelligence with the target use case of acting as a sophisticated guide for software platforms. The reason being that AI can simplify and handle complexities of technical workflows that would otherwise fall on the user. There's a general trade-off in software development where an app is either simple but feature-poor or feature-rich to handle many more types of use cases, but then takes an investment of time and technical know-how to solve. So the Beta AI is currently split into two chunks. The core AI, which handles stuff like problem solving, general purpose learning, task execution, and memory management. And then the ILM, the intermediary language model, which handles breaking down natural language into information that the core AI can handle. The core AI work started over about a year ago and is currently functional. So right now, we're just focused on the ILM. Now, the ILM itself can be split into three submodels. So one that takes natural language and then turns it into intermediate language that we designed. One that takes the intermediate language and converts it into what we call a meta model to handle, and the meta model itself, which is part of the core AI that handles doing something with this processed text, usually by updating internal information and then taking some action or actions like responding to the user, or to poke some program's API to get it to further act. So the past month I've been working on these last two pieces. In particular, I've been focused on building up the capabilities of the meta model to work on itself and the language model, hence the name meta model. So I'm building up this the language model to be able to train itself through language. So now let's look at an example that I've been working on this week. The use case that I'm currently targeting is teaching the AI how to play tic-tac-toe with just language. So if we go click over here, we have a message that I wrote to the AI where I'm trying to get it to understand that the column property of a board tile should be numerical. And don't worry, a user will not see this or write this. This is something that we'll train a generative model to handle natural language and parse it into this. So the core kind of thrust between this intermediate language is you pretty much identify a chunk of text, a word or set of words, and then you go do something with it. Then you hand that off to the meta model to do. So we break this up into clauses. So the first clause right now would be to identify tile. So we're taking, okay, here's this word tile that we've gotten, ideally from natural language. And what we're going to do is say, okay, execute identify entity. So execute is a clause that hands this off to the meta model to handle. And the identify entity is a hook. So hooks are either special code that do something that we train it to do, or it's something that the model's been trained to do itself. And we have these default hooks, which are like hard-coded, but the eventual idea is that we train the AI to replace those hooks so they can handle itself. So here we're saying, okay, we're identifying entities. So we're saying, okay, the meta model, we're going to be working with this thing called tile in the future. And then we're now going to, take the piece of text called column, or just shortening it to COL for column. And we're saying identify this as a property in reference to a tile. So this tile on a board of a tic-tac-toe board, it has rows and columns, and now we're just focusing on the column property. And this is where it gets a little bit, meta-ish, is that now we're going to look at the meta property. The meta property is a special entity in the meta model that is looking at or points to a given property that's been targeted, which was targeted by this previous identify property. And now what we're going to do is we're going to select instances of this property. So we have an instance of an entity pointing to a property. Again, users would never see this. And now what we want to do is identify something called dtype, which is an underhood, just data type of like what this information is. And now we're going to say, okay, we're going to select this property, and the select property is in reference to select entities. And if there's any confusion, identify references like identify a concept, identify a definition, and then select is get some instance that exists of that definition. So now we say, okay, select property. We're looking at dtype. It's being selected as the meta property, which is in turn being pointed to column. So this is a special case of we're looking at the property of another property. Now we're going to say, okay, we're working with the word integer. And now we're saying we want to set the property to be integer of this dtype. And because this is meta property, what it does is it passes it through to the original top level property. So now we're saying, okay, this column property of a tile itself is numerical. By default, when you create a property, the meta model defaults to it being just text. And so like the natural language that we're trying to do is say, okay, a tic-tac-toe board tile has a property call, and it is a numerical value. So that's what we're effectively just trying to say, is take this natural text we built into this, and then when we execute it, the system will go handle it. This is some internal logs for like debugging and seeing that it did what it did. And then we can check the model back here, and then we can see if we look at tile, there's this column property, and it's an integer. We can also effectively what's the default value, what is it required, and some more sophisticated things. And for instance, if we take this, we go back and we want to change it to say, okay, let's say that the column's a floating point value. We can do that. So let's get rid of all these spaces, and let's say this is a float. So run this, see that it ran just fine. If we go back, it changed this back to float. So yep, that's our update for this week.